bunch of NFL games on a Saturday? That's right, and there's $1 million up for grabs. The first place, one person gonna be a millionaire. Now, these are the guys you want to play, but also avoid to try and win that $1 million. And let's begin with a name that you all know, Christian McCaffrey, who's damn expensive. $8,800 is a 7-point favorite. The question, is he worth it this week? Now, there's no Deebo Samuel, and McCaffrey has played 2 games without Deebo in San Francisco. And in these 2 games without Deebo, he averages a whopping 29 touches, 144 total yards, and 33 fantasy points per contest. Again, a small sample of 2 games, but this is wild. And in his last game, he played 95% of the snaps. That was a season high. This is vintage CMC usage since before the injuries the last couple of years. Yeah, pretty simply put, you want to play him. But do you want to play this tight end in Mark Andrews, who's $5,500? Because look, he's been struggling. Andrews has been below 10 points in 3 straight games and hasn't topped 12 points, so like a solid game since week 6. And of course, his quarterback situation is up in the air, and he leads all tight ends in drops right now with 9. It's looked pretty ugly in some key situations lately, but his usage is still elite. He's out there running routes more than any other tight end in the league. And see for yourself, running routes on 97%, 83, 100%. If you're basically in the 80s, it's elite usage for a tight end. 90s is unheard of, and 100%, you never see this. Andrews is doing it, and it's still leading to elite usage. He's 2nd in tight end red zone targets and 4th in deep targets amongst tight ends. And now he faces the Falcons, who allow the 4th most fantasy points to the tight end position. All of this is kind of a volcano. It's like underground, about to erupt for Andrews. Let's see if he puts it together this week. I like him. Now, McCaffrey is expensive, so where's a running back that maybe we could find some value in? Well, why not $4,900 James Cook against a Chicago Bears number 29 ranked run defense this week? These are the snap counts for Cook as of late. Normally this year he's playing like 15 to 18% of the snaps, but the last 3 games they've spiked 46, 41, and 31% of the snaps for Cook. And the Bills are 9-point favorites in this one, and when they're bigger favorites, they usually give Cook more usage compared to Singletary. And it's kind of a big deal if he starts seeing more usage because it'll mean more touches, and his yards per touch is 6th amongst all running backs in the NFL. He's been fantastic, a nice value, lower-owned option. Now, another running back option who's a solid option, but he's also expensive like McCaffrey, is Derrick Henry. And man, oh man, is Derrick Henry a solid play. He'll be a favorite this week against a poor Texans team, a pretty big favorite. He's $8,600. Now, the question, like we had with McCaffrey, is he worth it? Well, check this out. Since 2019, Derrick Henry against the Texans, who have a number 31 ranked run defense that has not improved, nearly 29 touches per game, 32.2 fantasy points per game, and over 200 total yards per game. In terms of fantasy points per game and touches, it's pretty similar to what McCaffrey has averaged without Deebo Samuel. These 2 dudes are going to be highly owned this week, and they should be. And to add even more context to Derrick Henry, more relative context to this year, as a favorite this year, because he's a 7-point favorite this week, he averages 25.4 touches and 131 yards, over 22 fantasy points per game as well. So yeah, play Derrick Henry. If I had to choose one of these dudes, I would be choosing Christian McCaffrey for the receptions upside, but the answer might be to get to both of them. They're currently the 2 highest owned running backs, so another way to get some exposure is just to play him in the props market. Over 105.5 rushing yards. I have him projected for about 118 yards this week. You can take this with a free bet. Link in the description below on prizepicks.com. Use it or lose it. Okay, so those are 2 expensive running backs, meaning we're gonna have to find value. Outside of James Cook, you're gonna have to go to wide receiver. And why not target the Giants wide receivers? You have Isaiah Hodgins at $4,100 and Richie James at $3,900. Let's start with Hodgins. The big 6'4" receiver has seen his snaps increase every single week. 69%, 82, 84, and then a season high 87% of the snaps. He played on 91% of the passing plays, also a season high. This is great usage and it's increasing. And at 6'4", he has nice downfield usage and red zone usage. So he's in play as a flyer option, if you will, cheaper option, and so is his teammate Richie James. Richie James, you're seeing on the screen right now his routes run and his targets. The last 2 weeks, 9 and 5, 14 targets the last 2 games is not bad, especially since he's now playing a lot of the snaps. Instead of playing on 43% of the passing plays a couple weeks ago, as you can see here, it's been 90% and 81%, and he's in the $3,000 range. So those are some punt wide receivers that are in a good matchup, and on the opposite side of that game, we get Adam Thielen. Thielen's just $5,300 still, even though he's finally starting to see some production. He was seeing good usage all year long, just not producing. Now he's seeing fine usage, but good production. Thielen over his last 4 games is still averaging 7 targets per game and a little over 15 points per game. This is solid usage. And now he faces a cornerback in Holmes out of the slot in this one on the Giants, who ranks 120th out of 122 cornerbacks, the 3rd worst cornerback in the league this year. And in general, the Giants secondary ranks dead last in the NFL as of right now. Good matchup for Thielen at a fair price point. But now we go from wide receivers. We have to start to build build out our tight ends. Which ones are in play? Well, there's Dalton Schultz at $4,200 against the Eagles. Is this somebody that we want to play, especially after last week? I mean, the guy only went for 3.5 points on 4 targets, but he quietly saw season high usage. 96% of the snaps, 88% of the routes run. I mean, his usage has increased now for 3 straight games, and this is great. I mean, this is borderline. Like I said earlier, anything above 80% is great for tight ends. This is borderline top 3 tight end usage. And this is sneaky good news because the price drop, but the underlying usage is actually improving. He's coming in just around 6% owned, lower owned according to the DFS blueprint. Play him. And consider his division rival at quarterback. Yes, Daniel Jones at 5,600 is actually in play because he's dirt cheap and a nice matchup. You see, the Giants are slight underdogs with a 22-point team total. Historically, this is a great spot for fantasy quarterbacks. And in similar spots this year, Daniel Jones is averaging 22.3 points and 66 rush yards per game. That's great production. So I like Daniel Jones this week. I think he's a fine stacking option. We gave you some of his cheaper options earlier, and I like over his passing yards. I have him in the 220s, over 200.5 passing yards. Again, you get a free bet matched up to $100. You put in 25, you get 25 back. You put in 100, you get 100 right back. When you use the link in the description and the code SAL22 on prizepicks.com, go ahead and you can access it with that link below. Okay, so Jones is one side of that game at quarterback. Kirk Cousins is the other side and the more appealing side. A 25.5 point team total is the second highest on the slate at just 6,300, even after the big week last week. And not to mention the matchup versus the Giants dead last secondary. We've talked about Adam Thielen as a stacking option. Now let's talk about the best stacking option. And that would be Justin Jefferson. Look, hands down, he's the best wide receiver play on the slate. I know he's expensive. I know he'll probably be a top 5 owned wide receiver this week according to the DFS blueprint, but the dude has been damn productive this year. He leads every single receiver in targets, in receptions, and yards with over 1,600 this year. Now the big thing, you get the #1 receiver in the league, the most productive receiver in the league against the dead last ranked secondary. Yes, you play that guy in stacks. But do you want to be playing $6,800 Alvin Kamara, who's currently coming in as highly owned? I mean, he's picking up right now top 3% ownership, and is this something that we want to be taking on? Look, there's no doubt this dude has a strong matchup. The Browns have a dead last ranked run defense according to Pro Football Focus, and just last week he saw over 20 touches. But also last week, very quietly, David Johnson played a decent amount of snaps and actually ran more routes than Alvin Kamara. 10 routes run to 9 for Kamara, and that matters because Kamara's upside comes from his receiving ability. Like, we're not excited to play a nearly $7,000 Kamara because he might see 16 to 18 carries on the ground in what is a bad offense. You get excited because he might catch 7 balls, but now he's not running routes. He lost routes to David Johnson last week, less than 20 routes in 4 straight games. So I'm actually out on Kamara at that price tag. But what about DJ Moore, who's $5,500, currently coming in at single-digit ownership? The price point is up $200, but he's still a talented #1 wide receiver for his team. And as you can see, based on his fantasy point production, it's up or down 5 points, 20, not even a point, and then 18.3. But he has seen pretty good air yards in 2 out of the last 3 weeks, over 100. That gives you big upside. And this was before last week's game. But before last week's game, where he had over 18 fantasy points, he was averaging 14.6 points in his career with Sam Darnold, nearly 10 targets per game. And those metrics in terms of fantasy points just increased last week even more. The DFS blueprint currently has DJ Moore at 12% owned. It's slightly under owned based on what my optimal lineup percentage is, which means good leverage. If you want to see all of those tools, check it out in the DFS blueprint link down below. Okay, now do you want to be playing Juju Smith-Schuster? He's $5,800. His $5,000 range is pretty appealing, but do I prefer Thielen and Moore over Juju? Well, let's discuss. Juju's usage since being injured has been increasing. This is the first week back from injury, clearly limited 35% of the snaps. Then it starts ramping up, 74, 81, and this past week, 88% of the snaps. He's now seen 10 or more targets in back-to-back games. And more specifically, in his last 5 healthy games, he's averaging over 9 targets per game and over 21 fantasy points per game. So the simple answer for me is yes, Juju's my favorite $5,000 receiver. Another reason why, he's coming in less than 10% owned, lower owned than DJ Moore, similar to Adam Thielen. I want that dude. And yet again, we get another $5,000 receiver right at $5,000 flat. Expect Gabe Davis, because of where he's priced at $5K flat, because of his recent production, he's probably going to come in 5% or less owned. But keep in mind, he's still deadly playing with Josh Allen in this offense, and look at his matchups. He'll be facing Jones this week, Jalen Jones, who ranks right now 112th, bottom 10 in the NFL in coverage. So although he struggles to get open, he has this big play upside, ranking top 5 in yards per reception with Josh Allen. So yeah, Gabe Davis is a nice GPP play. And so is his teammate Isaiah McKenzie, because McKenzie's going to face this guy right here, Kyler Gordon. And Gordon is allowing an 82% catch rate this season. So McKenzie versus a bottom 5 slot cornerback is a nice spot for another cheap wide receiver. And let's keep the cheap wide receiver train going. $4,200. We keep going down in price tag here. DJ Shark. Now, Shark has been productive, but for 40% of this game, he'll have to face Panthers stud cornerback J.C. Horn. But the other 80%? But for a large amount of the game, he'll also see C.J. Henderson if Henderson plays, who this season ranks 87th in coverage. Henderson left the last game with injury, so track this. But that's the best it'll get for Carolina, because the guy who filled in for Henderson was brutal. And that would be Keith Taylor, who filled in. He only played 55% of the snaps, gave up 7 catches and 116 yards in coverage. So yes, if indeed Henderson is out, all the chips in on DJ Shark. And even if Henderson plays, he's not good. So Shark, either way, solid, strong play, who's currently coming in just around 5% owned. All right, back to the tight end position we go. $4,900 TJ Hawkinson has seen his price decrease because of a bad week, a very odd bad week last week. And it was odd because his quarterback threw for over 400 yards and he only had 33 of them, but it was fluky because Hawkinson's usage still stayed pretty damn elite, running around on 84% of the routes, playing 95% of the snaps. He was out there per usual. He even earned 9 targets. He just only produced 3 catches for 33 yards. Pretty fluky in my opinion. And now he faces the Giants, who give up top 10 points to the position. Hawkinson is a key stacking piece, my second favorite stacking piece behind Jefferson in Vikings Kirk Cousins stacks. Okay, now what about Patrick Mahomes at $8,400? We talked about Juju being a fine option, and I think that might be his best stacking option, but it's a little bit complicated. He has a nice 29-point team total. He has a nice matchup against Seattle, but it's difficult to trust his playmakers. Because yeah, Juju is there, and maybe that's the guy we go to, but outside of that, MVS has been very hit or miss. Justin Watson, you can't trust. Sky Moore, you can't trust. You have McCole Hardman returning this week. Kadarius Toney is seeing more snaps. So all these guys are cutting into each other. Does that affect Juju? It's difficult to find a guy that you can trust. Really, the only guy that stands out is Juju. I can't even trust, in my opinion, Travis Kelce. And don't get me wrong, the skill set on Kelce, and obviously the player, is elite, but he's $2,500 more than any other tight end, and he's coming in over-owned. He's coming in nearly 20% owned right now in the DFS blueprint. He's not a good leverage play, meaning he's not worth it in your GPP lineup. For him to pay off, he has to hit one of those 30+ point weeks, which he's capable of, but at a high price point and high ownership, I'll just bet against it happening. So I like Mahomes mainly just with Juju. Maybe you throw a flyer out on one of those other receivers, but if you wanted to not play Mahomes and bet against him, I actually think under 300.5 yards is a pretty solid bet. I have Mahomes in the 280s this week on Prize Picks. Again, that free bet up to $100, code SAL22 linked below. Now, if there is a player with higher ownership that I'm okay playing in that Kansas City Seattle game, it's on the opposite side of the game. And it would be DK Metcalf, who's 7,100, currently coming in as a top 10 owned player on the slate. I would have to double stack Kansas City running back with DK for me to feel okay, because then you'll get him at lower ownership. Now, there's no Lockett here, and he's never actually played a game without Lockett, but be pretty damn sure that the 235-pound speedster is going to be fine and see more target share without Lockett. DK is now up to being second in the NFL in red zone targets, and he also has 18 deep targets. 40 cheat code targets on the year for him, ranks top 10 amongst every single wide receiver. And what you're seeing on the screen right now are the Kansas City cornerbacks, and this is their height and weight. They all weigh around 190 to 193 pounds. 40 pounds less than DK Metcalf. Yeah, he's going to have a massive advantage on all of these undersized cornerbacks. Now, there is one more player in this game that I do want to discuss, and it's Chiefs running back Isaiah Pacheco. I'm not really interested in McKinnon right now. He's coming in as a top 10 owned player, but Pacheco is coming in below 10% owned, and I think he could be worth a look, because over his last 6 games that he's seen more usage, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire has been out, where Sleef Edwards-Helaire returns this week, but he's averaging 12.3 fantasy points, 80 rushing yards. When you factor in the receiving yards, 92 total yards. Now, this is pretty damn good for a running back on the highest team total as a big favorite this week. He's going to continue to see 15+ touches at lower ownership. I like him. Now, another guy I like if he plays is Nico Collins at $4,400. If he returns, he'll face the Titans, who give up the most fantasy points to the position. And right now, Nico Collins is actually coming in somewhat lower owned. Even if he plays, I think he doesn't even crack 12% owned. So this is a nice spot for him in his individual matchups against guys like Roger McCreary, who right now ranks outside the top 60 cornerbacks in coverage, and Mitchell, that's Terrence Mitchell, who ranks outside the top 60 cornerbacks as well. Now, if Nico Collins doesn't play, Chris Moore will be a hot topic. And Moore is $4,700. His price point is coming up. He also has that nice matchup, but the difference here, Chris Moore is coming in as the highest owned wide receiver on the slate, above 20% owned. And I get it, the matchup is good, and I get it, he's earning targets the last couple of weeks, but I'm not playing a 25% owned Chris Moore this week in a matchup where I can't even run him back in a stack. He's a fade. Now, I've gotten some questions about Dallas Goedert, who returns from injury this week at $4,500, and here's what I have to say. There's not going to be Jalen Hurts, and in one game last year with Gardner Minshew, small sample, but he goes over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. Again, extremely small sample, extremely different offense. There's now A.J. Brown involved and a whole lot of differences, so we can't take this, but it's a fun stat to look at. But more importantly, what came out of me tweeting this was Sports MD Analysis saying, yeah, he agrees basically, and that also this injury he's dealing with doesn't show any lingering performance impacts for tight ends after this long of a layoff, so this is great news. He should be healthy. Okay, so we go back from tight end to more value wide receivers, because a lot of these dudes we're talking about at the wide receiver, Justin Jefferson, the running back positions, we're going to need to find value. So is Drake London the answer? Because Drake London last week in Desmond Ritter's first career start earned 44% of the targets, 11 of the targets, earned 70 of Ritter's 97 passing yards. But the problem was just how bad Ritter was. Again, his first start ever, but just 3.7 yards per attempt, 50% completion percentage, 13 to 26, and under 100 yards, that's all rough. Not to mention Desmond Ridder is a rusher. He ran for nearly 40 yards last week, which does hurt some red zone upside for Drake London. And in general, it's a brutal spot this week. They're facing the Ravens, who have been improving and getting healthier in their secondary. I don't like this spot for Desmond Ridder and Drake London, who's now picking up ownership. So I stay away from Ridder. Now, what about $7,100 Ramondre Stevenson? Kind of in this loaded 7K range with Dalvin Cook. Tony Pollard has been producing. You have Joe Mixon there as well. Well, last week, Stevenson returned. He was limited to just 67% of the snaps. Didn't matter. Over 20 touches. Didn't even start this game. Still goes for over 170 yards and a touchdown. He's obviously been fantastic. But this week, the Patriots have just an 18-point team total, and he's an underdog. So that's bad news. But the good news is these splits. He's played 7 games as an underdog, 7 as a favorite. The 7 as an underdog, he averages more fantasy points, 17.7, because he sees more passing game usage, 5.4 targets per game. He actually averages 95 total yards and touchdown opportunities as an underdog. So nice matchup here against Cincinnati. I like to play him. Now, a guy we loved playing last week was $6,500 David Montgomery. He paid off for us. He looked dynamic, both in the passing game and on the ground. But the problem is now, he's a 9-point underdog. And Montgomery at this price tag, $6,500 isn't insanely cheap, especially compared to Ramondre Stevenson, not that much more, but Montgomery's coming in around 10% owned. You're not getting very low ownership for a guy who's a 9-point underdog. I'm going to stay away. All right, so we talked about a lot of his teammates. Josh Allen, the most expensive quarterback versus a poor Bears defense, but this is the odd part. Look at this over here. Just a 24.5-point team total. They're not expected to score a ton of points. And now this is an interesting spot because who do you want to run it back with on Chicago? You can't run it back with the quarterback Fields. I just said I don't want David Montgomery, who's left at the wide receiver position. I mean, we have to track Chase Claypool's health. St. Brown got hurt last week. I'm not trying to play Dante Pettis or Byron Pringle if these dudes are even healthy. So this is one of the rare don't run it backs. Just play Buffalo. Josh Allen, Diggs, Gabe Davis. Josh Allen, Diggs, McKenzie. One of those. So these are the players you want to be playing and avoiding. Now, once all the injuries updates come out, you can check the tools in the DFS blueprint to see exactly who the best leverages are that other people aren't playing. And when you play them, you'll have a better chance to win. So check that out in the DFS blueprint. Link down below on Patreon. Merry Christmas Eve and Merry Christmas to all of you. Happy holidays and enjoy the rest of your holiday weekend.